believers, and like they would read us Bible stories before going to bed. So I always knew like who Jesus was, and my mom's parents, so my grandparents on my mom's side were missionaries in Honduras, and we would go see them a lot. And so it was just like very incorporated into my childhood, like even like telling others about our faith. And then when I was 5 years old, my grandparents were at the time living in Iraq, and they were shot and killed. And that was really hard as a 5 year old because directly, like, I basically lost my mom to depression for a good bit and like didn't have that emotional support from like my parents. And I remember I didn't want to like ask them for anything or like have like any cause any kind of like need or like burden to them. And so that was like pretty difficult. And just like I remember thinking about like how could that happen? Like they were good people, even as a 5 year old, which is just crazy. And then when I was 7, I remember I was at a VBS and they were really emphasizing like God wants to like hear your problems and he's there to like comfort you. And that was the first time that I like really understood like that the Lord was there for me, like, and would never fail me. Like I used to be my parents, like I was like, oh, they're always there for me. And then in that moment, like they weren't in my mind. And so I like put my faith in put my trust in the Lord when I was 7 and got baptized in first grade. And then middle school kind of learned a little bit more about like what a relationship with the Lord looked like. And then high school, I dealt with like a lot of apathy and just like hypocritical like Christianity, and just it's sad to look back and like just know how apathetic I was about my faith in high school. But then going off to college, when it was like my choice to like go to church on Sundays, like I felt like that was when my relationship with the Lord really like skyrocketed and it like really became my own. And I've just since then learned a whole lot about his grace. And so yeah.
Thanks, Meredith. That was awesome. Wow. Stephen, you're on.
Come on, sweet. Well, I have it's a bad habit of residency that's beaten into us. So I have slides in a way, but I'll give you guys just an intro to who I am, and we'll talk a little bit about something that Stan and I ended up talking about at his place a while ago that we thought might be interesting to talk about again. I likely expect that you guys have talked about this before in some way if you guys have been part of Christian community in any facet, but we'll kind of dive in. First of all, just to introduce myself, I think I know a couple of you guys, but not all of you guys. I'm Stephen. I'm one of the chief residents here, and I am originally from Michigan, did all my school up in Michigan, ended up taking a master's year for heading down here. And I'll share a little bit more detail about that journey kind of throughout this as well. I'm heading to St. Louis next year for cardiology fellowship, interested in medical education and teaching. And I think one of the reasons that I'm glad Stan kind of reached out was I think this was something that a topic that I think I wrestled with a lot as a medical student and as a resident, and in many ways still do. And I think it's something that we really can't talk enough about, even though I think all of us who have grown up in any kind of Christian circle likely have heard things like this before. So just you guys can hopefully see my slides, and just to give me a heads up, Stan, is everyone here med school, grad school? What's our distribution today? And obviously faculty.
All first-year students, looks like.
All first-year students. Okay, so preaching to the choir, as it were. Cool. Well, I'll talk about idolatry medicine. What is it? How does it manifest? How to diagnose this? And we'll do some case studies. And these are all mostly biblical case studies. And I'll talk about my own story and how it interplays into this. A couple of requests. I'll have a couple passages that we'll read, both from the Old and New Testament. If I could have someone help me read them, that would be great, just because otherwise we'll all get Zoom fatigue real fast. And then basically after we get to 1 and 2, it'll basically be discussion from there on out. So feel free to hop on the mic and discuss with me, because it'll make it a little bit more fun. All right, so diving in, I'm going to start out with talking about Old Testament idolatry just as an interesting, I think, case study into what this is. And we'll read a passage next before discussing some things. But I wanted to set a backdrop for the first passage in Exodus 32. Remember, as you guys know, the Israelite story is one of God's abiding promises to them and keeping various covenants with them. They were led into Egypt initially and prospered when Joseph was there. And then after Joseph died, they weren't doing so hot. They were mistreated, basically as slaves. And then they were rescued from Egypt via a whole bunch of plagues, miracles, and led out and actually had a lot of their wealth restored to them on their way out. And now we're going to pick up the story where Moses is going up the mountain to hear from God himself. And I wonder if anyone could read this kind of passage from Exodus 32, 1-5, just to start us off. And the question is, as we read this, I'll give you guys the question in advance is, what did they do wrong here? Just thinking about this pragmatically. Does anyone want to volunteer to read for us? Bueller?
Yeah, I can do it.
Thanks.
So Exodus 32, verse 1-5. Up, make us gods who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So Aaron said to them, take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people took off the rings of gold that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. And he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And they said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. And they rose up early the next day and offered burnt offerings and brought peace offerings. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play.
Perfect. Thanks, Kyle. So mull on it for a second, but I think just to get us started off talking, otherwise it'll just be me talking, which is no fun. What do you guys see as having the children of Israel having done wrong? What went screwy here? There's a lot of things, but I just want to get your initial thoughts. We won't spend too much time here, but what do you guys think? Feel free to use the chat too. I can if people are typers instead, that's totally fine with me. What do you guys think?
So I read this like 2 weeks ago and I was so confused because like Aaron before this, he was such a good guy. Like he did everything right. Like he got to go with Moses to the Pharaoh and all that. And then as soon as Moses left, he like, I don't know, went haywire. So that's what stands out to me is that like as soon as he couldn't see or as soon as he didn't have somebody holding his hand to be like, this is God, this is what we do, he just forgot everything. So that's what stood out to me.
Love it. Yeah. Anything else? If not, I'll highlight what stood out to me. I kind of highlighted chunks of the chapter, and sorry, that was I can't see people's names anymore, but thank you to whoever that was. Sorry. So yeah, a couple of things. Thank you, Stan. A couple of things that stood out to me is the fact that this thing was human made. I agree. Aaron's kind of transformation is kind of interesting because he is usually kind of shown in the Bible as being a man of character and kind of leading in that way. But this is an instance where he fell and fell tremendously. And the ways in which he fell, he started making something that is human-centered. So up and make us gods that go before us. And interestingly, right after that, he follows it up by misattributing who brought them out of Egypt. So first, Moses is credited for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. But then later on, you can see the children of Israel praising these gods that Aaron just made for bringing them out of the land of Egypt. They start worshiping them. They offer burnt sacrifices, peace offerings. And then the last bit is they rose up to eat, drink, and play. And play, from what I can dig in my own kind of amateur biblical studies, is kind of has sexual innuendo built into it. They're perhaps orgies or something like that. So they went from serving a God who brought them out of Egypt, gave them all these beautiful covenants, promises, hope, and a future, to serving and worshiping human-made things, giving them credit for things they did not do, and ultimately sinning in front of this. And again, I bring this up not because this is what we'll talk about, but I think this pattern that was in the Old Testament exists even as we move into the New Testament. And I think it's something that we'll see as we read a couple more passages. This is kind of the same deal. I'll read this passage from Romans 1. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Therefore, God gave them up in the lust of their hearts to impurity, dishonoring the bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the truth of God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the creator, who is forever praised. So again, same thing. This is from the New Testament, from Romans, speaking about these prior incidents, but again, shows the same pattern of turning away from God, worshiping something else that is created, and ultimately sinning, and talking about the various lusts of the heart. So I just want to show that pattern first. The thing that I find interesting, that again, all of you know, because we are in kind of the Western world, is while we've kind of moved from most likely in most instances worshiping non-physical objects, the pattern is the same, and it still leads us into tremendous sin today. And I think that's what we need to spend some time thinking about, because I actually think it's fairly rampant in medicine, and I hope to share some of my own story in this. Moving into perhaps a non-physical context for idolatry. This is from Colossians 5, which says, "Put to death, therefore, what belongs to your earthly nature, sexual immorality, impurity, lusts, evil desires, and greed, which is idolatry. Because of this, the wrath of God is coming. You used to walk in these ways in the life you once lived, but now you must rid yourself of all such things as anger, rage, malice, slander, and filthy language from your lips." So again, while we've moved away from physical objects, what I think Colossians is showing us is now that there are idols in our heart that are non-physical, that are either emotional, that are longings deep in our heart that we cannot fill. I did want to pause for a second, because we've talked a lot about instances of idolatry in the Bible, but again, since I'm likely talking to a group of people that have kind of been in small groups for a while, do you guys have a favorite definition of idolatry, or a good conception of idolatry that you guys think about? I'm sure that you guys have talked about this before. I'm just curious what you guys have thought of, or how you guys frame this currently, before I perhaps show a couple examples. Any thoughts?
I like to think about it as like what's motivating me, like what's spurring me on to like do whatever I'm doing.
Yeah, what is kind of the core of your being? Yeah, your motivations. I think that's a fantastic one. You know pretty quickly what your motivations are, sometimes by the fruit, but also yeah, like you said, what motivates you. I love that. And that actually goes to a lot of biblical truth, because the Bible often talks about how God looks at the heart, man looks at the actions, but God looks at why you did it. So I think that was beautifully said. Any other thoughts before we move on? I had two quotes from our good friends Timmy Kay and John Piper, who, as always, have something wise to say. And not that this is, biblical truth, but I think it's a good summary of how to think about these things. Tim Keller says, "An idol is anything more important to you than God, anything that absorbs your heart and your imagination more than God, and really anything that you seek to give you what only God can give." John Piper's is kind of a similar thing, but just with a twist. It's something that is loved more than God, desired more than God, and treasured more than God, enjoyed more than God. I think both these definitions are hinting at what Meredith is saying. It's kind of this longing. It's this deep longing. It's that thing you look forward to at the end of a long day of studying, or at the end of wards. It's that thing that you would spend all your money on if you had $1 million. It's the thing that you wish more than anything deep down, even if you're not able to express it with words. So given that we have some examples, here's where I'm hoping that we'll spend some more time thinking. And again, I know you guys have probably thought about this before, but specifically in our field of medicine, what kind of idols do you think people struggle with is the first question. And in the back of your minds, think about what is the effect of that idolatry? Thoughts from the group?
Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Working. Okay, perfect. I think of just success. You idolize success.
Yeah, I like it. And actually, if I may, I'll probe you a second further. Sorry, I don't know your name either.
Elizabeth.
It's Elizabeth.
Elizabeth, I'm presuming you've probably seen that in somebody. What do you think the effect of that has been for that person? Again, we can be impersonal about this, just as we think about it before we get personal to ourselves.
I think of it as like it takes away from relationships, takes away from personal relationships, like on top of your relationship with the Lord, but it's a little bit more like obvious. But you just like throw yourself into your work and then you kind of lose sight of what really matters.
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. You do something, do some idol, whether it's success in this case, at the exclusion of all things else, even though those other things are of tremendous value. I really like that. Great. What else?
Productivity.
Productivity. Do you mind elaborating a bit? Just out of curiosity, what do you mean by that?
Like how many Anki cards can you do in a day? How many like lectures can you get through? Stuff like that. And I guess the effect of that is like not being intentional with your time, like avoiding like relationships or spending time with God, in order to like be more productive throughout the day.
Love it. Yeah. Idolizing, just getting stuff done, right? I mean, I think it's, again, preaching to the choir. Everyone has had to kind of get stuff done to get to this point. So we very much feel that we have to keep getting stuff done to get to the next stage. And again, we do it to the exclusion of other things that are important to us. Out of curiosity, have you guys seen, I mean, we can take success and productivity as case examples. If people take that too far, people may think they're pursuing success and productivity, but are these people content once they pursue these things to their full end? You can say, yeah, I mean, yes or no, it's an open question.
I feel like it's kind of like with physical possessions as well. The more you get, the more you want. And so I feel that with success, like the further you get, the only more like successful you want to be. If you tackle one thing, you want to tackle the next. And so I feel like it really is really hard to get to a point where you feel like you've done everything.
Yeah, I like that. The Bible calls it chasing after the wind. You're chasing something that you can't really get to. It's a constant chase that never ends. And we'll actually get to some actually interesting quotes that I've come across. I think hint on that point as well. So I think that was Elizabeth. Cool. Well, I wanted to pause for a minute and share a little bit about my own story, and kind of wrestling with idolatry, because I think part of this time, I'm hoping, because as you guys recognize, productivity, success, getting stuff done as a med student, as a first-year med student, there's a lot to do. And sometimes I think one of the great travesties that I recognize looking back is that I never spent time actually thinking about stuff like this. I too was on the kind of the hamster wheel. And I think it's helpful to just stop for all of us and think about, are we doing this right actually from a biblical perspective? So my answer, I think I told you guys about my kind of academic credentials that were, but from a kind of a spiritual, personal standpoint, my family is originally from South India. My grandfather came to the US in the mid 60s. He was a pastor. He started a church in inner city Detroit for some of the ethnic diaspora that was here for work. And in just setting up the background in culture, because it ends up tying into my story of idolatry, I think that church growing up was really everything. And ethnic churches, for those of you who may or may not have experience with it, they end up being a little bit of everything to everybody. They're kind of your hourly, weekly, monthly calendar. They are your social structure. They're your financial support. Sometimes they are community in a really pure sense, and they're a good thing because you really learn how to pour into that community, and you get poured into as well. So it's a good thing. I think where things get a little bit perverse is some of the honor shame culture of Eastern churches, which again, you guys have likely heard about from either friends or Tim Keller likes to talk about it a lot, where there's this sense where an individual's actions are not really just their own, but they're part of a collective. They belong to a family structure or a church structure or a racial ethnic structure. And it's a good thing when you're doing well, when you are the successful one, when you're the kid who gets into the good colleges, when you're the kid getting good grades or you've won awards. It's wonderful. When things are when you're shamed, things get south pretty quickly because now your social structure is in jeopardy. Now people don't look at you the same way. You don't get the respect that you think you need. You may not have access to people's help that you did in the past. Yeah, and I say all this to say where it ties in for me is about fourth or fifth grade, our church structure went through a very annoying and very sad kind of power struggle in church politics that I have not actually even seen since, where people wanted different things from the church. They didn't like how money was being handled. They wanted to change denominational things. Family lines were drawn. Words started being said that were against people's character rather than biblical context. And long story short, my family ended up leaving the church my grandfather started when I was in fourth or fifth grade. And the reason I share that story with you is at that time, some things happened that shouldn't have happened that ended up getting me a little bit later. For example, a little bit of shame was applied. So for example, my father, who I didn't really talk about too much yet, he is a medical technologist, does blood bank testing, but the reason that he's in that job is when he was about 23, 24, he ended up having to drop out of pharmacy school because his father, my grandfather, passed away from a heart attack. So ended up having to drop out to kind of work to support the family. And right when we had kind of left the church, there was a lot of stuff being said like, hey, the son of a lab technician is not going to really amount to much if you leave. You guys don't have the financial support, the social standing to make it anywhere. Things were said, in to shame kind of other ethnic groups or other kind of general church groups where things were not perceived as sacred, or that you wouldn't be able to find somebody from a familial standpoint. And I say all this to say that it left me with a tremendous amount of shame from a community standpoint. The other thing that I wrestled with was, again, from a personal medical background, I have a very, very mild form of cerebral palsy where the left side of my body is a little bit spastic and weaker than the other. Spent my childhood in physical therapy and cast with our friendly neighborhood orthopedic surgeon. And again, from a community that values honor and shame, weakness is not prized. So I say all this to say I left that church at fourth or fifth grade full of shame. And my strategy, because I was still a motivated person, was to regain honor, right? So I put my focus into things that I was good at. I was good at school, like many of you. I put my focus into school. I did well at school. I got the things that I thought I wanted. And I'm going to fast forward just a little bit, just for the sake of time, so you guys don't get too bored listening to me. But the first thing that I wrestled with was right after I got into medical school. It was kind of this great moment of victory. I got into Michigan. It's a cool school. It was my dream school. A lot of the kids, I will say, in a moment of pride, that I grew up going to church with after we had split, did not get into medical school. A lot of them ended up not making it. So it was kind of this moment of pride for the family that I had made it in. And unfortunately, rather than quelling some of that shame, I feel like it accelerated it. I worked to try to get leadership positions. I tried to do things on my CV that made me look good and tried to gain acclaim to my own detriment. And I think a very tangible example of that is residency applications for me. I ended up just applying to places that I thought sounded good. And long story short, I got some cool interviews, and I ended up taking that fourth year for research. So I had some cool opportunities. And I remember talking to a mentor who sat me down. I told him, hey, Dr. Eagle, here's where I'm planning on going for residency. I know that you went to this place on the East Coast. It's really cool. You were a chief there. I think I'm going to go there too. And he looked at me and kind of raised his eyebrow, and he's like, why do you want to go there? And I told him, hey, it's, got a good reputation, it'll open doors for me. And he was a close mentor. So what he proceeded to tell me was, you have been blinded by your own pride, because there are things going on at that school that you have not looked into. There, at the time at this particular school, there was a major sex scandal between a lab person and their boss, which resulted in the chair of the department getting kicked out. A lot of faculty were getting poached to other institutions, including someone that I thought was going to be my future mentor. And he pointed out my pride and my idolatry in wanting a title that actually would have ended up hurting me. So an instance of where that, and I was fortunate that this mentor corrected me, and he actually ended up recommending that I come down here for residency. And, perhaps again, a point of pride. I had never heard of UT Southwestern up in Michigan. I didn't know what a Parkland was. I didn't know. I was like, I don't know what that is. So it was interesting, but I can tell you that because I had a mentor point out that idolatry in my heart, my life has been blessed. So that's point one. Point number two that shows, I think, a bit of idolatry in my own life was actually when I arrived here as an intern. July of intern year, I was in the CCU, and we had an admission, and overnight it's just the intern with a cross-cover a fellow at home. So I had an admission for someone that came in that I thought might be sick. So I called the fellow to run something by him. And he's like, nah, Stephen, don't worry about it. This is nothing serious. You can just admit him, we'll watch him and discharge him in the morning. And I remember as a July intern, I presented this patient to the cardiology faculty. And long story short, they thought that I had missed something, like a do not miss diagnosis, like a possible dissection or an ACS event. And I was like, no, I called the fellow, but it's like the attending did not hear me, and come to find out that the fellow had lied about me calling him in the middle of the night. So that attending and that fellow, the day fellow, proceeded to rip into me, calling me, the words that were said were like, this is the worst performance we've seen by an intern ever on this service. And then after rounds, someone gave me a little feedback and said, you're not planning on going into cardiology, are you? I'm like, well, yes, sir, I am. I work with a cardiologist at Michigan. I did a master's for that reason. He's like, I don't know about that, Stephen. We'll have to wait and see. I say all this to say, at that point, I feel like my life kind of exploded in a way. I actually ended up canceling all of my, research meeting with the cardiology faculty. I stopped talking to a lot of the cardiology fellows that I was thinking about working with. I self-destructed in a way because I lost sight of who I was. All of my plans for being this type of physician in the future kind of imploded because I had this tremendously negative experience. And I want to pause there and stop talking and reflect on perhaps some diagnostic criteria of idolatry in your life, because I think where I was at, I was kind of at end stages of pride, and it led me to really lose myself. But I think there's a bit of a continuum of idolatry. The first stage in many of our lives is that we count the cost. As I think a couple of you had mentioned already, you recognize that maybe studying too much is an idol, or being successful is an idol. But then when it comes to actually caving a bit or giving up a little bit of that for something else that's beneficial, like your spiritual life or your family, you're not willing to count that cost. You're like, you know what, I'll just study a little bit more. I'll just do a little bit more. It's not worth it. This family, this faith is not worth it to me. I'd rather get this other thing. I think that's a very, very, very early sign of idolatry. You're not really willing to give up any piece of it. And it's subtle at first, right? It's 5-10 minutes, it's an hour of study time, but it ends up adding up. The other thing that I find interesting, and this is certainly true of residency, is when you poke that thing that's an idol in any way, if you poke it, diminish it, miss it, there's a pain that you get that's not just like a superficial pain, it's a deep pain. So, perhaps the student that really values feeling smart, they get feedback on rounds that they didn't do well, or they get pimped and they don't know the answer, or perhaps someone values how they look and they don't get the acclaim from a post that they put up. Whatever it is, there's a deep pain that you get that no one else can describe for you, and no one else can really understand. I think that's another symptom of idolatry. The third and the fourth are, I think, end stages. Your loss of identity, when it's taken away from you. Maybe you lose your opportunity to go to a dual degree program. Maybe you lose the opportunity to go to X residency. Maybe you don't get to go to a certain part of the country, or for even non-medical things. If you don't get a certain relationship, you forget who you are. Some people are so tied into these things that they forget who they are. They're no longer a person, a Christian, a family member. They've lost their X residency spot, and that's all that means to them. And last but not least is sin. I say this not lightly, but because even in the Bible, idolatry is associated with sin, but even in our own lives, things like how we respond to other people, with anger, with greed, with jealousy, in lust. Some people turn to substance or physical relationships or pornography, whatever it is. People turn to something to help quell that shame and that fear in their life. So I say all this to say, think about these things in your life. Use these things as some diagnostic criteria? Are there things that you're not really willing to part with that really hurt when someone pokes at? Consider them an idol, and we'll talk about treatment a little bit later. All right, I've talked for like 15, 20 minutes at this point. We need to stop me talking. So we're gonna do some case studies from the Bible. Hopefully identifying a couple idols I think are relevant to medicine, but we'll see what you guys think. So I want to read this case. One has two kind of scriptural verses associated with it. And then at the end, I'll just show you guys, we're going to talk about, these are evidence of idolatry. What type? What are the side effects? And have you seen this before in the medical school context, in the hospital, wherever, in the medical context? Okay, so those are our three questions. So someone want to read this first one quickly? It's two separate verses, but they all kind of go together. This is, yeah, when Isaac and Rebecca are,
I'll read it, case one. So it was when the camels had finished drinking that the man took a golden nose ring weighing half a shekel and 2 bracelets for her wrists weighing 10 shekels of gold. Now Rebecca had a brother whose name was Laban, and Laban ran out to the man by the well. So it came to pass when he saw the nose ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrists, and when he heard the words of his sister Rebecca saying, "Thus the man spoke to me," that he went to the man, and there he stood by the camels at the well. And he said, "Come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and a place for the camels."
Great. And I neglected to give you guys context. This is when Isaac has a servant sent over to his, I guess, his relative's house to find a bride. And this is the first encounter where, Rebecca is loaded up with a whole bunch of gold jewelry, and Laban notices. Case one, I guess, section 2, also regarding Laban. Just to give you guys a backdrop on this, as you guys know, Jacob marries Rachel and Leah. Laban deceives him by giving him Leah first, and then he has to work extra for Rachel. And then Laban and Jacob agree to a deal where Jacob will get all the certain types of spotted and speckled sheep and goats, and anything that's purebred or kind of a single color, Laban will get to keep. And Laban actually deceives Jacob again by removing the spotted goats, the male goats, and sending them 3 days away, thinking that now he won't get any spotted goats. And God ends up providing for Jacob miraculously. Now he has a large inheritance of spotted sheep and stuff, despite Laban's trick. And now God tells Jacob to go back home. And this is where we pick up this story. So someone want to read this? Sandy, want to read this too? Oh, Sandy, want to read this too?
Yeah, sure. Then Jacob rose and set his sons and his wives on camels, and he carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained, his acquired livestock which he had gained in Padan Aram, to go to his father Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, "Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad." And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?
2 weird passages. I'll put the questions up and I'll go back to the passages, but I wanted to focus on Laban first. Is there evidence of idolatry in Laban's life? What type of it? What are the side effects? And have you seen it before? So I'll go back to this one. This one's a little bit tricky because there's a whole chapter to think about here. But what do you guys think? If not, I can share. We'll try again for case 2. Something I think is interesting here is how he treats Rachel once he finds out that she's loaded up with gold jewelry. He runs out and sees that she's weighed down with all these shekels of gold bracelets. of financial things and runs out and greets her in a way that is atypical for that culture, because he recognizes that this person that's coming to her is likely very, very wealthy. The reason I say that that's likely true is that that behavior continues in the second instance, chapters later. He ran after Jacob and Rachel for his golden gods. He would not be parted with them, which I think speaks to a form of idolatry of wealth that I think sometimes we oftentimes encounter in medicine. We're not really willing to part with it. The other thing to think about is oftentimes we like to associate with people of wealth, right? Laban notices that this person that's visiting is a wealthy person and says, hey, come on in. I know what you like to represent. And I think that's something that I often see in medicine. And that's at the faculty level too, someone that is well connected or powerful. People will go out of their way and adore them and idolize them when really they probably shouldn't. And the reason I say that this is likely idolatry is you can see it leads him to sin. He turns to other gods like idols. He chases after Laban, doesn't really say anything about his daughter Rachel or Leah. He just kind of fixates on his idols. Mm-hmm. There's a second one that I'll mention here of Rachel's. The fact that Rachel stole her father's gods. I personally find that fascinating because it suggests to me that there are sins that even not run in families, but that our families can even teach us in terms of idolatry. There are gods that we worship in terms of culture, in terms of habits. Some families are very material focused or success focused, that it gets passed down from father to daughter, son, etc. And it's something that you have to be aware of and just think about. All right, I'll skip this one. This one I think is a little bit easier to think about. Someone want to read this? This is from Matthew.
I got it.
Cool.
Case 2. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up the heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their, that's a tough one.
Phylacteries, I think.
Phylacteries wide and their tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah.
Same 3 questions. Is there evidence of idolatry? If so, what type? What are its side effects? And have you seen it before? Thoughts?
This reminds me of that one part in Mere Christianity where he's talking about like, you can be a good Christian and everything and like think you're awesome, but it's just pride. And like that pride is like pride of being a good Christian. That really stood out to me, especially coming from like college. And I felt like that was rampant there.
Yeah. Pride is, pride is a tricky one because oftentimes we don't recognize it. Again, it's not a physical thing, but what I think a couple of you guys have mentioned so far is people doing something for their idol that they go out of their way. What is their motivation? They're doing it to be seen, right? So they get recognition. It shows the intent of their heart, right? They're not doing it to be obedient. They're not doing it to worship God. They're doing it for themselves. Good. Pride. What else? What are the thoughts on pride?
I think this is one that, oh, go ahead, Judy.
I was just gonna say maybe like seeking external validation from others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Respect. Mm-hmm.
And what do you think the effect is when you do that, Judy? If I might probe you a little bit on others, side effects, as it were.
Yeah, I guess you become so like worried about pleasing other people that you kind of, I guess you sort of forget like what or kind of like going back to the motivation, like why are you doing this sort of in the first place?
Yeah, that's fair. Do you think it's common? I mean, we are trained to be doctors, like independent, physicians that are able to lead teams and, do our thing, right? Like this external validation can't be common, can it?
I mean, I don't know. I guess like I personally also just struggle with that in my life. So I guess that's why it stuck out in me.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. As Stan knows, I'm sarcastic and a bit of a troll. So you're spot on. I struggle with it too. As an ENFP, people pleaser it seems like it's in my DNA. So external validation is very much a thing. The reason I mention it is really the foundation of a lot of medical education, right? The fact that you need to please X attending, X preceptor, X testing body to get to the next stage. It's almost inherent in our field and something that we have to be mindful of. It's not that it's not a bad thing to do well and to want to do well, but there becomes this self-serving cycle where everything that you do is to show somebody that you're doing it. And that's a very perverse place to be. So great observation, Judy. Thank you. Kyle, I think I cut one of you off before.
Yeah, I was just going to say kind of a tangent to this, and another place that I know I struggle with pride a lot, and I think a lot of other medical students do as well, is when you study, an incredible amount for a certain exam, and then you do really well, you tend to attribute too much of that success to yourself. And it's really hard to kind of separate it out and say, like, the only reason I was able to do any of this was because of God. And so when you get a great test grade and you're really excited, instead of kind of gloating about yourself, just being like, wow, like God is so good. And I know that's something I struggle with, is just being able to attribute all of that to God when I know that I did put in the work, but it wasn't actually me. It was God helping me out.
Love it. Yeah. And I think you actually bring up a very interesting, I don't want to say metaphysical question, but just a bit of a timeline or a gradient question. It is not, I think, as we all recognize, a bad thing to want to do well. It's not a bad thing to put in effort. That is a good thing. How can I tell when I've gone too far, though? Right? How do I know when my pursuit of excellence in a biblical sense has gone to idolatry? I think it's something to think about, because again, we all struggle with it. This is not as black and white as we suppose. What do you think are warning signs? Again, we've talked about some of them, but just curious from y'all's perspective, because I think you guys are wise enough to recognize that you ought to be giving glory to God and not thinking of yourselves and not relying on the praise of others. But when does stuff go too far? When is it a good thing and a virtue? When does it go to an idol?
I think pretty much everything, rather than a time commitment you set to it or something like that. I think it's more so your reasons for doing it, right? So like, if you want to do well on your tests so that you can get the residency you want, so that you can go and practice in a way that glorifies God, and you say this is a means to an end to be able to glorify God, that doesn't matter. It's less so about how much time you're putting in, and more so that's your reason for doing it, rather than I want to do well on this test so that my friends will think I'm smart, or so that the professor will think I'm smart, and stuff like that. So I think it's more so kind of what you mentioned earlier, like God sees the heart rather than the action. So just being able to say, I have to study really hard as a necessity so that I can do this thing that's eventually going to help me glorify God.
Bingo. Love it. And I think, even the Apostle Paul, we don't have time to talk about it, but even the Apostle Paul talks about working harder than all of them, and yet not I, but, Christ in me. It's that same idea. It's not the work itself. It's not the hours. It's through motivation. So I think that's where I'm hoping that this focus is not on kind of the external result or even the residency you choose. I think sometimes we focus on, if you're pursuing X type of residency or X type of fellowship, that's not good. And that's not really the case. It's why are you doing it? It's the heart. So just keep that in mind. So I love it. How much time do we have left, Stan, before you kick me off?
10 more minutes.
Cool. Well before that. The thought that I had interesting from this chapter is also an awkward fact. The name doctor also means teacher, right? People do like to be called doctor too. I point that out, not because it's a bad thing to be labeled appropriately, but sometimes people seek that recognition in society as well, and just be cognizant, right? Because people will happily laud that over you. Oh, this is a doctor. They'll come around and show you around to their friends. And you can get very caught up in that, especially as, you know, Southwestern students that are at a great medical school. So just be mindful of that and its effect on your heart. Just something to think about, because I think sometimes early interns struggle with that too. They're newly minted doctors, and there's a lot of they're very self-conscious of that, but they also get caught up in the being called doctor thing. So just be careful. I'm gonna just say one brief word on treatment of idolatry. Other than identification, recognizing that you need help, I think turning away from it is probably the hardest part of this whole process. I think, again, if you've been in sessions before, you recognize that things like studying too much or pride or, you know, reliance on success is not a good thing. The hardest bit is, how do you turn over that idolatry that you have over to God and have it stick? Because I think all of us have these experiences where we do it and okay, God, I'm going to study for this test in your name, and you know, help me to do well, amen. You know, I think kind of deal, but how do we actually change the heart? And in my view, and I think this is where I'll share a bit of my own story again, it requires a community. It requires others apart from yourself, because oftentimes you will not be able to see the idolatry in your heart, and you need accountability for it. So if someone notices that you're spending inordinate time doing something, if someone notices that you are overly focused on certain things, you need someone around you to help you with that and to keep you accountable. So just a thought and a plug for Christian community. In terms of my own story, I ended up canceling all my cardiology interviews, our cardiology research appointments, like I told you guys about. And during that weird time of isolation, and it felt like depression, I think God brought back to me things that I used to love doing that I had stopped doing because they were not pragmatic anymore. Things like spending time mentoring, things like spending time teaching, things like going to my small group. And out of that time of kind of isolation, God brought me new research projects, new mentors that I did not expect. None of them were cardiology related. Not all of them were general medicine related. And I think my testimony is that I applied to cardiology from this program, not having a single mentor or research paper or project in cardiology at this institution, not a one. And that was a very weird thing. That is not something that is normally done. Yeah, the typical approach, the advice that I would give someone is that you need at least one paper in cardiology to apply. That's just standard for the field to actually be successful. I applied saying that I wanted to be a medical educator without a single research paper. And come to find out, when I went to places, God provided mentors for me that were like, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. Let me see how we can support you in that. Rather than pretending to be something that I was not, and actually following what God had given to me that I did not even think about, God gave me peace in the midst of fellowship. He ended up sanctifying that desire that I thought I would use for my own name, ended up transforming it to a different approach that I'd never thought about. I never thought I would be a teacher, but here I am, and God's provided a cool fellowship to provide opportunities for that. And because he did that, I'm grateful and a lot happier than I was, I think, as an intern. So yeah, I'll basically end there. There's a cool quote that I'll show you guys. You guys should watch this YouTube video by David Foster Wallace later. It's a very interesting one. He is not a Christian. He is an atheist writer, but he talks about worship in life from a non-Christian perspective that I found fascinating. He said there's no such thing as atheism in adult life because everyone worships something. And it gets to that point that I forget which one of you mentioned that everyone worships something, whether it's wealth or power or fame or looks. And whenever you chase that one thing that is not God, you end up feeling empty and alone and without that thing. So I thought that was quite powerful. It's something that I have shared with friends that are not believers that ends up prompting some fun conversations. So I thought I would leave you with that. Cool. Well, I think we're kind of done 5 minutes early, which is always a good thing. Any final thoughts, questions, y'all? Cool. Stan, back over to you.
Yeah. Hey, thank you so much, Stephen. That was very good. Yeah. And I must say that having been in not similar shoes, but we all struggle with similar dealings with idolatry or putting people on pedestals. And we're both Karen and I are learning now that that it's dangerous to worship famous people, famous pastors, no matter how good they seem. We should honestly worship God, and He needs to be our focus. I mean, he has to be uh, um, the one that provides satisfaction for our own personal lives. And so, thank you for the reminder, Stephen. Appreciate that. Here, let me close us in prayer. Yeah, let's pray. Heavenly Father, God, Lord, just thank you so much again for an opportunity to learn and to listen. Lord, we thank you for Stephen, for his heart, for his desire to share and to help the body grow, Father. Lord, I just pray for all our students, God, even those that were not able to make it today. Lord, we just ask that you would protect each and every one of us. God, Lord, I just thank you again for just this amazing opportunity that we are able to gather in the middle of the day to think about you, Father, to worship you, Father. Lord, we love you. We pray all these things in Jesus' most precious name. Amen. Thanks, guys. Just quick reminder, Bible study tomorrow, right, at 8 o'clock, 8 a.m. We good? Good to go? Okay. Awesome.
Oh, also, sorry.
Yeah.
Profess, the lunch gift certificate things will come like by the end of today. They're not going to come right after. Just heads up.
Nice.
Flying fish. Yeah, flying fish.
I'll add one last thing too. I'm at Parkland for the next couple of months at the VA. I know you guys probably aren't rotating anymore, but if you guys ever want to stop by, my door is always open. Stan can give you my email or my phone number. Feel free to reach out if you need anything.
Yeah, Stephen's a good guy. Yeah. So okay, talk to y'all later.
There you go.
See you guys.